welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 hooper and current teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And I'm Amari Sanko for the second Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport. If you are not listening to Wes and Blake Silverman on The Pin Down on the Detroit Bad Boys YouTube channel, you absolutely should be. If you are not reading Amari on the Detroit Free Press, you absolutely should be. And shameless plug, if you are not reading the Motor City Hoops Substack, absolutely free. I kind of think you should be. Just put out a really cool video breakdown of Ron Holland II in his most recent game where he had 25, I guess not most recent game now, but a recent game. But beyond all of that, we are joined graciously for the second time. I think, Omari, we're getting close to friend of the pod, right? Like they come on for a second time. Nate, you got to start letting us call you a friend of the pod. He is part of the Hollinger and Duncan pod, the Dunked On pod, and the NBA strategy stream on NBA League Pass. He's an NBA cap guy, a scout, all of this. Nate Duncan, thank you for coming back to talk Detroit Pistons basketball with us.
Yeah, my pleasure, guys. Let's get to it.
Yeah, so we had you on initially back in November, and I just feel like the conversation around this team has transformed pretty dramatically, obviously, in that span. Like, let's just sort of just dive into the entirety of it, I guess. Like, how surprised are you by what's taking place? Or if you're not, like, if you saw the potential in this thing early, then why?
I wouldn't say I saw the potential for them to be a top 6 seed, to be a team that's going to be, in all likelihood, 10 games or more over 500. I think basically 2-3 games in the season say that I thought they're going to make the play-in, which really nobody had at that point. That was really more about that I thought the competition around them was going to be pretty bad. And also that I thought the Bulls were still going to be trying to protect their top 10 pick, which as it turned out wasn't the case. So yeah, a lot has changed. JB Bickerstaff obviously has transformed this team. They've gotten so much more out of these guys at the defensive end than I thought. That's probably the place I would even start with, maybe more than what they've done offensively with Cade and the 3-point shooters, is just how much better they've been defensively, particularly the improvement that some of the young guys have shown.
Okay, so that's where I wanted to go, Nate, was, we can go all sorts of paths, and we will in the time that we have you. What is the number one thing that has surprised you the most? Not necessarily maybe even the most impressive thing or who the best player has been or anything like that. What has been the aspect of the Detroit Pistons, whether it's a player's performance, part of the team performance? Is it the pace that's super, super fast right now? Is it the defense that I believe is still number 1 in the NBA since the start of the calendar year? Is it Cade? Is it, what is it that surprises you the most that you're like, yeah, I did not see this coming at all?
Yeah, I guess you would have to say the pace, number one. I did a breakdown of this a couple of weeks ago. You guys, of course, are very familiar with it. How much Cade has really been responsible for helping them juice the pace, and shit, like Asar Thompson and Ron Holland, like those guys will run the floor a lot. The 3-point shooters, Hardaway and Beasley, will jack go up really quickly in transition. But if you look at the numbers with Cade on the floor versus Cade off, he's really the one statistically who's driving this. They run at pretty much an average rate when he's off the floor, and they're number 1 in the NBA when he's on the floor. And so that has been a real floor raiser for this Pistons offense in a way that I would say I didn't see coming. I felt like Cade was maybe being a little bit miscast as the point guard in previous years, that using him kind of more like Jason Tatum was being used would be a better use of his skill set, because he wasn't that fast. He turned it over a ton, and that really has been a huge transformation. But the transition thing was the biggest thing, where I was just like, this guy's kind of slow. He's not really pushing the ball to the floor, and that has been precisely wrong this season.
Cade Cunningham is the ex-best player right now.
Oh, man, you know what? Let me punt on this one until next week, because we do an episode, top 10 players in the NBA. So we're going to break that down in greater detail at that point, and we'll do our awards then. So I want to dive in all my stats and come up with it. But I would say you've got to I try to be conservative on these things, but top 20 would probably be realistic at this point, I'd say.
Shout out to our guy, Piston Jack, in the chat. Thank you for tuning in. Let me make the question a little more broad here, Nate. Cade Cunningham, all NBA, ? Because that's a little different than Cade is ex-player in the NBA, right? Because all NBA removes some players that you would say is quote unquote better than him that haven't made and I know you're doing the awards. Do you anticipate having Cade on your all NBA team?
Yeah, I think I probably would. Again, don't hold me to that. I like to really, really dive into it. I always get like Tim Bontemps. Hey, what's your top 5 in MVP for his straw poll that he does? And I'm always like, oh, I don't want to do this right now. Like,
you get to be part of the straw poll? That's amazing. That's awesome. Let's go.
I don't vote in the real poll, but apparently maybe I'm a tastemaker. I don't know. But
what's up, Downtown Deuce in the chat as well. Thank you very much. I want to go back to the defense, Nate, because to me, that has been very impressive, especially a team. I mean, Isaiah Stewart is really, really good defensively. Asar Thompson has shown his ability, but then I would say you have a team of like neutral at best defenders, right? Like, I don't know, maybe you disagree in terms of individual players. So is there something scheme-wise that JB and staff has done that you've noticed? Is it just an effort level? Is it just Asar and Isaiah Stewart? Or, maybe I'm not giving another guy enough credit. What have you seen defensively from the Pistons that has led to a top 10 defensive rating in the NBA for the whole season?
Yeah, if you go back to JB Bickerstaff's history, particularly in Cleveland, the thing that stood out the most to me, I know his tenure there ended not the way anybody would have liked, but look at some of the names that he coached there in Cleveland, what their defensive reputation was before he got them and what it was afterwards. You take guys like Karis LeVert, who actually evolved into a pretty high level defensive player under his watch. Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell were both viewed as huge liabilities. Those guys got a lot better under his watch as well. There are a myriad perimeter players that he got his hands on that were like that. And now he's done that with a lot of these other guys. I think the guys like Beasley and Tim Hardaway Jr., yeah, not stoppers, but playing the best defensive basketball of their careers. And I think what JB does that stood out to me from the moment I saw this team at the start of the year was they just provide a level of pressure on the defensive end. They just make it harder to execute your offense. And really anybody can do that, particularly if you're guarding someone who's not going to just blow right by. Like Malik Beasley, yeah, his help awareness is not great. He gets beat off the ball a fair amount, not getting over screens particularly well. But you know what? Like, he's a decent athlete. Like, he can just get into guys, make you take 3 or 4 steps further out to make a catch than you want to make and slow you down another 2-3 seconds in the shot clock. And I think pretty much everyone on this team has taken a step forward in terms of their individual defense and just the overall level of pressure that's applied. Like, that is the biggest hallmark to me of the JB teams over the years. And that's what stood out to me the most.
The top 2 guys on this team probably defensively have been Isaiah Stewart and Asar Thompson. And they're both hovering around the 20-minute mark. So it's curious that the Pistons have had a top defense, and it'd be curious to see the level of like all defense support they get at the end of the year. But I guess with those 2 guys specifically, what stood out when you watched this team?
Well, Isaiah Stewart, I loved him when he was younger as a rim protector. Then there was the experiment to have him play the 4. I know that's been something y'all have talked about a lot. And Bryce, I know you're not particularly surprised by what he has done this season. You're even like kind of getting mad at everyone else for not being surprised because you felt like he wasn't getting the credit that he deserves. I thought he was I think he really is a starting level of center. And I'd like to actually see them explore his shooting a little bit more at center. But defensively, yeah, I mean, he can really do it all. It's kind of funny because he can't really jump at all on offense and he still kind of struggles to finish. He's got a little bit better there, but like somehow he blocks all these shots on the defensive end. He kind of actually reminds me a little bit of the way Alonzo Mourning used to block shots. And Alonzo Mourning, he would get dunked on plenty, obviously, but his philosophy was, yeah, you might be able to jump higher than me, but if I put my hand in front of the rim, as long as I'm above the rim, you have to bring the ball to me eventually. And so I'm just going to get on the path in between you and the basket, and then I can block your shot. And also, he's really strong. Like, guys bounce off of him. I think like your best rim protecting weapon isn't necessarily it's your hands, is your shot. And so and Isaiah Stewart, we see on the perimeter too, he's got quick feet. He's got good recognition. He's not playing that many minutes. He can have a high effort level. So he's able to really affect a ton of shots. He's got great technique and pretty good physical tools, even though he's not really like a Skywalker who's going to like go get shots at the top of the square and reject them 8 rows into the stands.
It really is fascinating, and you outlined it really well. I've been trying to find the right words in the Substack. I feel like, people come for analysis, and I'm like, he just has really good timing. I just keep saying good timing, good wingspan, but like what you said, the way he plays with his chest, he never gets bumped off his spot. And that's a good point, because we've seen Stu get dunked on recently, but he has the type of mentality, he does not care. Like, he's not going to get embarrassed or have it affect how he plays. And then he comes right back and makes another play. And I do think he has really good timing with that. The other guy that Amari brought up was Asar Thompson. I would be interested, your thoughts, not just defensively with Asar. By the way, I would also like them to re-explore Isaiah Stewart spacing the floor offensively. Maybe a 25-26 thing, JB, please. Asar Thompson on both ends of the floor for you, Nate. What have you seen defensively? I think I'm even a little more interested to get your thoughts on Asar on the offensive end.
Yeah, we'll address that first then. I think the fact that he's just been empowered a little bit more on the ball this season, and yeah, you're not necessarily going to run plays for him. I don't think his jumper or mid-range game has developed quite as well as Amends has. But what he always could do at the lower levels was push the ball in transition. If he was on the ball, he's someone that you have to respect. And I think his finishing has gotten better this year. Like, that was actually one of the reasons I was higher on Amen than him, even though he was quote unquote the better shooter, which, neither of them have really checked that box from the outside yet, is because I felt like Amen had a little bit better of a handle, a little better feel for finishing around the basket at the lower levels. The statistics kind of bore that out from 2-point range, what they shot at Overtime Elite. And so I think Asar finally is starting to use his athleticism more to finish with a little bit more touch, use his body. And so I think that's been important. And also just the fact, like, he is a very good passer. He doesn't quite have the scoring ability to really, be a big pick and roll threat or something, but if he catches the ball on a broken floor, now he's able to do something with it, which I don't think he was able to do as much last year. And he also wasn't empowered to do that, I don't think, as much last year.
I feel like this Malik Beasley season has flown under the radar a bit nationally. He's leading the league in 3-point shooting. Like, him and Steph Curry are like the only ones to, hit their volume of shots. I think it was 9 threes on 42% shooting. What do you attribute the Malik Beasley leap to? How much of it is just him improving his game, and how much of that do you credit to the gravity that Cade's had as well?
Yeah, he was shooting it better than he was at any point in his career. Now, the big thing that he's done, he was very accurate last year. He had a year in Minnesota in 21 where he shot 39%. He was a huge piece off the bench for them in 22, that first playoff year for them. And then he was a massive guy in Utah with his volume as well. And then he got traded to the Lakers, and basically he's admitted he just wasn't mentally ready for that challenge, I guess, and fell off and ended up having to salvage his career with that minimum deal in Milwaukee. But he finally hit at a great percentage. And now he's combined the volume that he had in Minnesota and Utah with the accuracy that he had last year in Milwaukee. And so this is certainly at the high end of the range for him, but I'm actually not that surprised. I think that the fact that they've been able to be as good as they've been defensively when he's played is probably the bigger surprise to me. But like, this is a guy who's always like really gotten him up, and someone that you could run plays for. And you saw what a weapon he was, particularly for that Utah team that surprised everyone until he got traded to the Lakers in 23. So I knew he could be a big time weapon. Milwaukee didn't really use him that way, I thought, last year. Like, his volume was down. They had Dame, they had Giannis. They weren't really running plays for him. He was more asked to be like kind of 3-and-D sort of player. And I've been very impressed by what he's been able to do this year, but I also am not that shocked by it, honestly.
I think the big question for Pistons fans, if we can get into it a little bit, is what's going to happen with him this summer, right? Like, I think it makes Pistons fans very uneasy that he's on a 1-year contract. At one point it's like, extend. Like, they can't extend him. Like, on the contract they gave him, they're in a very unique situation in terms of cap space. Do they work as an under the cap team, as an over the cap team? Cade Cunningham's potential all NBA will facilitate that as well, but not having a first round pick plays into it. I guess my question, Nate, would be like, what do you think Malik Beasley's market is? Like, what is your vibe in terms of we always say every team can use shooting. Is he like a full non-tax MLE guy this offseason where it seems like a lot of teams have been a little nervous to use that full exception or even just at all because they want to take it into the season? Like, do you think that's going to be the kind of market he gets? Or do you think he's coming back something like surely not single digits per year, right? Like, what do you think his market will be?
Yeah, I think the mid-level would be about it. And maybe Detroit goes slightly above that to bring him back on, call it a 3-year deal for him at 28. I think it's funny because he got that big deal initially in Minnesota and then, really was kind of after going to the Lakers, the bottom dropped out of his market and people didn't seem too impressed by what he did with Milwaukee last year either. But I don't know that he's a guy that a team is going to invest in at, a pure starter level. Also, we've seen that these $20 million a year contracts for shooting guards have generally ended up being some of the worst contracts in the NBA. Like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is the latest example of that in Orlando. So I don't know. And there also aren't really many teams with cap space that I think are going to go to that $20 million a year level on him. And Detroit, of course, doesn't have bird rights on, so they would have to either use their mid-level or they would have to go that cap space route, which they absolutely could, by the way. They're going to lose their pick in all likelihood to Minnesota. So they could have up to $24 million in cap space if they do need to go higher than the mid-level. If they stay over the cap, that's going to be up for Trajan Langdon and his group to figure out what his price is going to be, because obviously there are other team building reasons why you would want to stay over the cap if you can. But I think he's been a really good fit. They finally got some shooting around Cade. I think everyone wants him to return. I'm always curious to know what the league thinks of some of these guys. Like, he's a guy I've always thought was really good, but that the league hasn't necessarily agreed on over the last few years.
It's year 3 for Jalen Duren, and he's starting to figure some things out. I think he tied his career high the other night with 7 assists. And, if you look at who the top playmakers for this team has been, he's like, it's Cade Cunningham, and then it's him. His pick and roll alley-oop combination with Cade is probably among the best in the league. Like, I'll put it up there with Chris Paul and DeAndre Jordan back in the day. And he's still expanding his game. I think his touch under the rim has improved. What stood out about Duren this season, what's allowed him to be a member of a defense that has been one of the top in the league this year.
Yeah, another guy who just his rim protection numbers by all the metrics were atrocious coming in. And now he's been about an average center, which is a huge step forward for a guy in his 3rd year, still as young as he is. And so, that was a big reason I was lower on the Pistons, was just thinking that as long as they're going to be playing Jalen Duren at center, like that's the most important defensive position, you're probably not going to stop anybody. And now he's gotten to the point where that's no longer the case. He still is not perfect as a pick and roll defender, but he's not someone who's just getting completely taken advantage of. And he does have the ability to do some switching. Of course, the Pistons are very good on the glass. He's a big part of that as well. And then offensively, I think the way that they've built this system works pretty well for him. He's not someone who's going to shoot from the outside, but his handoff game does work, because if you don't get over the screen, then his handoff game basically turns into a pick and roll, and he's got a lot of gravity going downhill and a 2-on-1. Or he can hand off to the likes of Hardaway or Beasley, or even Cade can shoot that too. Same thing with Harris. And so you can't just go just lay the big back in the paint when he's doing the handoff stuff, because they have guys who can be threats on those handoffs as well. So they're able to use his passing, but also the fact then that if he does do the handoff, he can then roll to the rim and be a huge threat there, or a threat on the offensive glass. All of those things coming together makes that handoff game more effective.
I really love, he's figured out the little drop pass behind him. I think, Sabonis is probably the guy that most people notice with that. Duren's really good, and he does it really well with Malik Beasley, which leads Beasley right into his 1-2 step, into his 3-point jump shot coming off of those. I want to ask you about one more player, and then I think we can kind of look ahead a little bit, maybe in terms of playoff type stuff and all of that, maybe even bigger picture, what this team needs to take another step eventually. But what did you think think about the move to acquire Dennis Schroeder at the trade deadline and just his play so far? Because I think it would be easy to look at his raw numbers, under 40% from the field, under 33% from three, and be like, oh, it's not that impactful. But I think he was exactly what this team needed. So I would be curious your thoughts, Nate, in terms of what you thought Detroit should have done at the deadline. Was acquiring somebody like Schroeder what you would have done, and kind of his impact so far and then leading us into the future?
Jaden Ivey out, I think it made a lot of sense to get someone like that. And they basically got him for free. They were able to glom on to that Jimmy Butler transaction. Schroeder disappointed out here where I'm based in the Bay, and I didn't think they were really using him particularly well. He was over his head as a shooter in his Brooklyn time too, but just to give you someone who can bring the ball up, who's a professional point guard, knows how to play, another guy who fits into JB's system defensively with the way he wants to play there. I think Schroeder even can guard some bigger players. He's good at chasing guys around screens too. I think he's a quality defender. So to get that guy basically for free, I think was a good use of what they had. It didn't seem like there was much out there in terms of a bigger deal. I know that it was much publicized that they had the cap space at the time, but as a fallback when they weren't able to really, pick up a first round pick for dumping a salary or something like that, I think just getting him for free worked out really well. And it's been really useful too. Cade's been out with this calf contusion. We'll see how long that's going to last. But I think, they've gone up against a couple of teams that aren't really trying to compete right now. And maybe they would have had trouble if they didn't have Dennis Schroeder, but just having a competent NBA point guard you can put in for Cade, and they've largely handled those teams relatively easily and allowed Cade to get some rest. Whereas if you didn't have that player, those could have been losses, or they could have been games where they were really struggling and barely pull it out in the end. So I think he's been pretty useful for them, even if, again, the stats aren't great. He's never really put together a long period of shooting well from the outside at the NBA level.
You were on the Ron Holland train early. How validated do you feel right now?
Not that validated. I thought his shooting would be at least a little bit better than that. It's funny you mentioned train though, because when I saw him at the Hoop Summit almost 2 years ago now, I was like, that's what this guy is. He's a train. He just gets the ball in transition and he just keeps going until somebody stops him. Like he is just absolutely relentless running in a straight line. And that's with his athleticism, that's actually pretty useful. I saw the game he had with 26 the other night, and I do think someone with his athleticism, ball handling skill, I think his passing is something that is not terrible. He got a lot of reps on that terrible G League Ignite team last year, and I think that was helpful for him. So yeah, he's going to need to make shots at some point. And of course, the fit between he and Nassar is difficult, because if neither of them are going to do that, we'll see if Fred Vincent can help him more during the offseason. He's kind of stopped taking them at this point. I was at least pleased that he continued to take them early on, but they also have different goals now as a team where they actually need to win. And so it probably having the 24% 3-point shooter shoot is not great. But one thing he has done at least is he'll now, if they throw it to him on the perimeter, there's no one in front of him. He just does a go and catch, and he's immediately blowing by anyone trying to close out on him, and he can get into the lane and make some plays. And of course, he fits right into what they're trying to do in transition. He adds a little bit of an edge too with the instigation. Going back to the Royce O'Neal incident, which I think, Amari, you and I talked about it in the preseason, where he just wouldn't let go of the ball for a jump off 45 seconds in a preseason game in Phoenix. So yeah, I really have to go back and think was that guy the right pick? I think for the Pistons, probably. I think he has a bright future. He'll have to figure out the shooting, but if he does, they're going to have a really, really good player. I think a high level of starter at a position where it's really hard to find guys.
I'm glad you brought up the passing. That's something I try to highlight consistently with him, because I thought he got a selfish tag in the pre-draft process, and I never liked that. There were questions about the decision-making or maybe the court mapping, but I didn't think he was selfish, and he's really shown some really nice passing flashes, and not even just in transition, but also in the half court a little bit. Let's look forward here for the last few minutes. Where do you think the Pistons end up in the seeding, Nate? Unfortunately, the entire NBA got bad news last night with the Bucks, unfortunate news, because I guess for me, I always want the best players to be healthy. And obviously for Damian Lillard's health in general, you want him to be healthy. With the blood clot, who knows where Milwaukee is at, but Detroit is currently in 6th. They are tied with the Bucks. They're 2 games behind the Pacers for 4th. I don't think they're, catching the Knicks, but I also don't think at this point the Hawks are probably catching them from behind. So like, kind of where do you think they end up? And like, is there a first round matchup? I don't want to say that you think is beneficial for them or what, but like which one would intrigue you the most for the Pistons to take on in the first round?
Well, it's pretty fascinating. They have that back-to-back against Milwaukee right at the end. And as far as Lillard's concerned, I tried to do some research on it yesterday. I still think the odds are that he's not going to return this season. There's maybe a chance that he could, depending on how far down in the calf that blood clot is and how they're able to treat it between now and then. But I mean, I think they're a game behind Milwaukee in the loss column. I'm guessing the tiebreaker is not decided yet since they have 2 more games against them. And, I guess you would probably say they're more likely to get the 5 seed. I think they would prefer a matchup against the Pacers than the Knicks. And I think the Pistons, I would favor the Pacers in that series. Pacers will almost certainly have home court. They're 3 games ahead of the Pistons right now in the loss column, which is what I like to look at. So I think they could give the Pacers a series. Like, I don't think that the Pacers are a team that's just like, they're going to blow them out of the water in 4 games necessarily. They're not just like such an experienced playoff team that they're just going to like de-pants the Pistons because they're inexperienced or something along those lines. I do think the Pacers have a little bit more depth, a little bit more talent. Rick Carlisle is a pretty proven playoff coach as well. That's been somewhere where JB has struggled in the past. So I wouldn't pick the Pistons in that series against the Pacers. And I do think the way that the Pacers can spread the floor with Miles Turner could cause some problems a little bit too. But I do think Cade would have a decent matchup in that series. Like, I don't think there's anybody on the Pacers that Cade is going to be afraid of guarding him. So I think that would be a good hard-fought series.
Should we get into some questions? I know we have a handful of people here in the chat.
I think they're just gonna. I think we'll do that after we let Nate go. So
yeah, I got like 5 minutes here. We can hit a couple.
I had a real quick one follow. So my question then is, Pistons lose in the first round. Let's play in that world. What do you think gets exposed in the first round for Detroit? Like, what do you worry about come playoff time? Is it like we talked about them adding shooting, but it's really like there's still some question marks there, right? Asar and Duren on the floor together, Holland and Stu on the floor together. We've talked defense. Like if there's something that quote unquote gets exposed or they learn about themselves that we haven't learned yet, can you pinpoint some aspect of this team?
I think the biggest thing would be just only having one creator and I don't think Cade is Luka Doncic yet. As good as he's been this season, he's not going to come in and be putting up 40-point triple doubles in the playoffs. The Pacers are not a great defensive team. Maybe it could happen. So it's an easier matchup maybe than some other teams that you might have to deal with. Like if they can get up to the 5 seed, like even, I guess that's, even New York, if they played New York or Milwaukee, like none of those are defensive teams that are just like so awesome. So maybe I will be proven wrong in that because I don't love any of those teams matching up against Cade. But also, what are the Pistons going to do if they take the ball out of his hands? And then when Cade's off the floor, I think they're going to really struggle to score too. So that would be one thing. I think also just a young team potentially making mistakes, and then the lack of two-way players as well. I think like Hardaway and Beasley on one end, as good as they've been under JB in the playoffs, you can really start to get exploited. They're going to run a bunch of pick and rolls at Malik Beasley with Halliburton or Jalen Brunson, for example, or Giannis potentially too. Doc Rivers knows Beasley's issues on the defensive end and how well is Duren going to be able to play out in space, and Asar is not going to get guarded at all. They'll probably put their center on him. So there are same thing with Holland. So there are a lot of players that they've gotten a lot out of this season. But if you really start to drill into it in a 7-game situation, they have a number of weaknesses, I think, that could be exploited.
Nate, we can close it out with this one. Award season obviously is coming up pretty much now. I guess to what extent do you see the Pistons receiving representation? I know Coach of the Year, obviously he and Kenny Atkinson have gotten a lot of talk for that. Cade, I believe he's the odds leader for most improved, and I know that there's been a lot of debate on if a number 1 pick should be in that conversation. I think me and Bryce are both in the number 1 picks probably shouldn't be, but yeah, just Coach of the Year, most improved, exec. To what extent do you think the Pistons should be in these talks?
Yeah, certainly JB, I think, will be top 3 in Coach of the Year. Kenny Atkinson would probably be my pick because so many guys have developed on his watch. You're talking about going to a 60 win level. I think that's harder to do than getting into a mid level, but the Pistons are going to win 30 more games, even more than that probably, than they did last year. And like I said, it just accountability, the way he's gotten these guys to play so much harder than they did before, and improved their defensive technique, getting them to run. Like those are all hallmarks of things that a coach can do. And we saw how much they struggled, of course, last year as well. So yeah, that definitely would be up there. Most improved, again, I haven't really thought about that too much. I think I would probably go Evan Mobley there, number one, especially because I like in that particular award when guys have added a discrete skill in particular, where Mobley, like, he's a much better shooter from the outside. He's added this ability to do stuff off the dribble and like put guys in the goal and dunk on him. He's probably going to be my defensive player of the year as well. But there are a number of guys who I think have really emerged, young guys in that 21 draft, 20 draft, who are now, kind of at that all NBA level. So Cade will probably be up there for me too, I would imagine. I wouldn't rule him out because he was the number one pick. I mean, am I supposed to rule out Evan Mobley because he's the number 3 pick? I think, and I like guys who ascend to at least an all-star level. If you're like, oh, you came out of nowhere to now be a good reserve or something, that's not most.
All right, Nate, thank you for joining us again, second time around. So we will call you friend of the pod and hope that you don't get upset about that. Before we let you go, please let everybody know where they can find your podcast, your work, everything like that. Let them know.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all, if you just go into my account on Twitter at Nate Duncan NBA, you can find everything. Same handle on Blue Sky. That's where you are. And we have a subscription podcast that goes 6 days a week, including with John Hollinger, or you can listen to the free feed as well, which comes out a couple times a week of our shows. So check us out there. Appreciate y'all having me.
Nate, thank you so much, man. We appreciate it.
All right. We will be right back after this short break. Mari and I are going to kind of look at the rest of the season, and then we are also going to take some of your questions. So we have a handful start already. If you're here live with us, thank you for joining us. Hit the like button, stay around, rate, review, subscribe, tell a friend, but also drop a question in the chat, and we'll get to that. We'll jump into all of those topics right after this short break.
All right, we are back with our next segment, and we'll go ahead and dive into some of the questions you guys have here. Some good ones from Sean Haddix. Is there a realistic upgrade this offseason, or just run it back? And it's funny, we were talking before the pod started about like how this offseason will be a bit more quiet because there's no draft pick.
No first round draft pick anyway.
No first round draft pick. And then also, just from a free agency standpoint, you have Tim Hardaway Jr. and Dennis Schroeder. So, if you want to go, for a big upgrade, you can, but you could also just bring guys back and run it back. I would be curious to see how this plays out, but regardless of how those situations play out in free agency, I don't see them shaking up this roster too much. I think they're aware that they have something special here, and they're just not going to try to not bring this team back next season. To be frank, they've exceeded expectations and they've earned the right to run it back next year and see if they can improve.
Yeah, I mean, I think where I'm at is I think there probably is a path to upgrade. I mean, in terms of a singular player, you will have access to all of your future draft picks once the draft happens. You have a path to you could have a path to real cap space. I know Nate mentioned 24 million. I think my number's 19 or 20, assuming Cade makes all NBA. I continue to guarantee that Cade will make all NBA, especially since he's now played 65 games. But if you renounced all of the rights, like Tim Hardaway Jr., Schroeder, all of that, if you found a taker for Tobias Harris, which I assume you probably could on a 1-year deal, you could get real cap space to make a move. It's just okay, well, now where is all your depth with that? Or you could, if Devin Booker was on the market, you could trade the picks and the young guy and go do that if you could outbid others. So I think there is a path to that. It's just is this the offseason for that? For me, O2, I fall more into I want to see what this looks like with Jaden Ivey. I think they should bring back Malik Beasley, and then you either bring back Tim Hardaway Jr. and Dennis Schroeder, or you find equivalent replacements of them. I think my biggest question moving forward is kind of the 4 spot. Like, is that going to be a SARS? Do you find somebody to replace Tobias Harris? He only has 1 more year on his contract. I think even in his older age, limited abilities, we've seen how important that role is. So I think I'm in the mindset right now it's going to be a quote unquote boring offseason with an early 2nd round pick and kind of run it back with these guys. We will talk about a couple, a player much of you are mentioning in the chat, but that's kind of where I'm at.
One more point on Tobias, like he really has meant a lot to this team. Like, he talked to anybody in the organization and they all rave about just the culture he's helped set, just how transformational he's been for this locker room. So, it would not surprise me at all if Tobias is here for a while. Next season would be, the last year on his contract. But hey, a lot can change. That's a long way away. But like I said, no, it would not surprise me if Tobias is here beyond next season.
Chuck Brewer says, agreed, run it back and trade at the deadline next year. That's kind of where I'm at. At one point, I was like, I think this next offseason is where you get aggressive. They have been so good. And the one thing I will remind, this is still a very young team at its core. And so, think about the 4th year leap we're watching Cade make. Well, JD and JI are about to go into their 4th year. Asar's 3rd year, with the, no offseason for Asar. O2. I mean, if you believe in Fred Vincent, it wasn't going to be this year where you saw the difference. He wasn't going to fix these guys' jumper in the first offseason. It's going to be next year if he starts to make a major difference. So I would essentially give it 1 more year. But speaking of some of those guys, Sham says, will the Pistons extend Jalen Duren this summer?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey, it depends on what they're willing to accept, but it wouldn't surprise me if they try to just lock it in now. This core has shown a lot. Like, Duren obviously has very, very strong chemistry with Cade Cunningham. He's improved defensively in year 3. He turned 21 this season. Like, he's still really young. Like, he was a year young as a rookie. So, I think he's shown that he could be part of this core long term. J.I., he played less than half of the season, unfortunately. But again, he shot 41% from 3. We've seen the difference in this team, just lacking his speed and, just how much he could have lifted this squad on some nights where, maybe K didn't have it going. They love J.I. too. So we'll have to see. But if the numbers are right, I kind of think about what Houston did last summer with Şengün and Jalen Green. I can easily see the Pistons doing something similar.
So yeah, Sharon Dalton says, I'm certain the Pistons will extend both Ivy and Duren, how much you think it will take for each. And then our guy, Pistons Jack, have you seen it? Yes, guys, you need to be taking in Pistons Jack content. And I know there's some other people in here as well, like, Downtown Deuce and everybody. There's plenty of content to go around, and it's a lot of really good content. Koob over at Locked On, we're always shouting out Detroit Bad Boys, all of that stuff. But he says, have you seen enough from JD and Ivy to offer extensions to each? I think where I'm at is J.I.'s got tougher for me, Omari, because of the injury, and I just what we started to see from him gave me confidence in what I would offer him, and then we didn't get a chance, right? We got cheated out of seeing if it was going to be consistent or not, because J.I. shooting 40% from 3 in 30 games is way different for me than him shooting 40% for 70 games, right? If he stayed at 40% for the rest of the year, I would feel really good about it. So I'm a little bit tougher there. My thing with JD is I don't think I would offer JD a number that JD would take right now. And I will say I'm really interested to see what it looks like in the playoffs. That's going to be a really good data point. We've talked about it all year. I'm not saying it's the end all be all, but he could perform a way in the playoffs that maybe would make me feel more comfortable about it. I just don't think Duren ends up taking what I would be comfortable offering right now.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it all comes down to the numbers and, how players feel that they're valued. But, I think it certainly helps both of those guys that, they've taken steps forward this season. I think if you look at markers of, is this something that can be sustainable long term? I look at Duren, what he's done. I think that's a fair point about J.I. shooting, but we've also both been, I think pretty firm in the long term, at least being average from distance. So it always comes down to the numbers. Obviously, the cap's going up 10%. So, what Şengün and Jalen Green got last year won't be what, Duren and J.I. get this season. But again, we've seen what this team's done. I think that a lot of people would agree that they've earned the right to, run this back. And yeah, I think last season, I thought I think Houston provided a great blueprint for, how you can sort of get ahead of the curve early. Because with the cap going up too, I think the opportunity cost of, an overpay now probably won't matter as much in 2 seasons.
Yeah, I mean, that's true as well. I think it's just like that. This is where the offseason is going to be interesting, I think, is really with this more so than outside free agents. It's going to be their own free agents and then us nerding out on second round draft prospects. That will be a lot of fun for me. I don't know about you, Amari. As we talked about, drafting in the early second round very much widens the range of the players you have to get familiar with as opposed to drafting in the top 5. Our guy Steven Suggs, always around. We appreciate you, Steven. Can the Pistons get the awards trifecta? Coach of the Year, Sixth Man of the Year, and Most Improved Player, but also nobody talks about Executive of the Year. Don't you think Trajan is in play for that?
So let's talk about Executive of the Year first, because that probably is the one that's been talked about the least. And I think just from a pure definition of going from 14 to at least 41 wins, like you're kind of auto in that conversation. And even though the core was already set when he came in, he obviously found the right vets to kind of elevate this group, and Tobias Harris and Malik Beasley. Obviously he got the coaching hire right with JB Bickerstaff. So he has a lot going for him. You have an OKC team that's been historically good. You have a Cavs team that's been, for the most part, or has had shades of being historically good. And I think those two scenarios are going to be real competition for the Pistons. I think a lot of voters value winning. So I'd be curious to see if they value improvement over just the raw wins number.
Okay, so let's look into that a little bit, because I was going through the standings here. So yes, Cleveland, historic winning. Front office wise though, unless I'm forgetting something, it was essentially one move. Probably the best decision they made was not doing anything, right? They didn't overreact the way I kind of was and moved one of the guards or one of the bigs in the offseason. The only other thing they did, not that it's nothing, was the DeAndre Hunter trade at the deadline. Celtics, nothing. I mean, I guess the Knicks have made some, but I don't know that that's played out at the extent that people thought. I don't think that they're going to be in the running there. Pacers, Bucks, not. OKC had what? iHeart and Caruso was that this offseason, right? So
yeah, those were the main ones.
Rockets didn't do it. I think it's interesting. I don't think about the Executive of the Year a whole lot, so that's probably why I haven't discussed it. But yeah, I mean, it seems like Trajan was very specific in what he wanted to try to do, and most things have hit pretty well. So Coach of the Year, I know Pistons fans get really, really mad, and I understand the argument of they're tripling their win total. I get it. I still understand people who want to say Kenny Atkinson, and Chuck, you bring up a very important part with the injuries and stuff like that, but they're going to win a lot of games. So I think he's top 2. I don't think there's a 3, but I think top 2 for sure. Sixth Man of the Year. I don't feel like Malik is getting the love he should be, Amari, for Sixth Man of the Year. That's the one that I think is not getting talked about as much as what it should be.
Yeah, we talked about this with Nate earlier, but Malik Beasley leads the NBA in 3-pointers. Anthony Edwards is number 2, and I think Steph is number 3. He's been among the elite of the elite. I mentioned the stat earlier, 9 attempts per game, 42%. And it's just truly been an elite season. I think this has had every marker of what the Sixth Man Award should be. And he has been absolutely elite at what he does for the league's most improved team that, if everything goes right over the next 2 weeks, will not even be in the play-in. They'll be in the playoffs. So to me, he's checked every single box. That should be his, in my opinion, that should be his award to lose.
All right, let's go to one more here from our guy, Downtown Deuce. Tobias has been great. However, the Pistons need to get bigger if they're going to seriously contend. I personally want the Pistons to pursue Naz Reid. Thoughts? We will answer that right after this short break.
All right, we're back with segment 3, and we're going to discuss the possibility of adding Naz Reid. My gut says that's probably more expensive than they want to chew right now, because every single summer you're going to have to make a decision on at least one young guy, for the next few years as far as extensions. So, their financial picture is going to evolve a lot over the next 2 seasons. Cade Supermax kicks in next year. If Ivy or Duran get extended, you're talking about extensions for them kicking in the season after that. So, I think the idea of Naz Reid fits this roster really, really well. I think practically, there's probably no realistic way you can compete for what his price tag is going to be.
I mean, I think the thing with that is you can get there, but as I mentioned earlier, like, what do we think? Nas is going to get at least 25 a year, don't you think?
Yeah, I would think so.
For Detroit to get there, if Cade makes all NBA, you're going to lose Malik, THJ, and Schroeder. And then you would probably, I mean, I guess in this scenario, maybe you could trade Tobias and open up the extra cap space that way. I think what we have to remember is operating over the cap means you get to pay THJ and Schroeder what you need to keep them around while having the non-tax for Beasley. Operating under the cap means you have to use that cap space on all of those guys. Cap space plus the room exception, which is significantly less than Beasley. So I think it's possible to get there. If you're going to do that, I think you have to know that he's your guy and really have a plan, Omari, for how you're going to build out the roster after that. Alan W says, I don't think we have the money to sign Naz Reid. Aldama could be a cheaper option, but he's a restricted agent, so we'd have to outbid Memphis. Thoughts on Santi Aldama back in your old stomping grounds of Memphis?
Yeah, I think he's one of the more underrated bigs in the league, and it's entirely possible that, I could have an inflated opinion because it seems like whenever the Pistons play him, like he turns into prime Dirk. So I think he's hit multiple 3-pointers in their last few appearances, but he fits this team really well. I mean, I think any big that, can knock down threes, rebound, and, give you some level of defense off of the bench is a rotation big. I would say, I don't know if he's a 4. I think you probably pay him more at the 5, and I would have to see the splits for Memphis. But the other thing with them too is that they have Jaren Jackson Jr. and he's sort of a unique big. So positionally, I'm not sure how Aldama would fit here compared to there. To me, he's a stretch 5, but I like his game. Personally, I'm cool with bringing Paul Reed back. I think he could probably give you a lot of the same stuff you would get from Aldama. Where are you on this one, Bryce?
Yeah, I like Santi Aldama. It's an interesting one. I haven't looked into the free agency too much because I just assume they're going to operate over the cap and they're going to kind of run things back. But as Downtown Deuce says, he goes, I feel you. I was thinking to take 20 to 25 to get Naz Reid. He's only at 13 right now. If he is at the lower end of that, if he's at 20, then if you told me there was a path to signing Naz Reid for the cap space you create, getting Beasley back on the room exception without having to trade Fontecchio or Harris, or maybe only having to trade Fontecchio, I'm a little bit more palatable to that. And that's where this offseason could get interesting. Again, right now, I don't think that they go down this path of a Naz Reid or a Santi Aldama or something like that, but they do have the flexibility to do that. They do have the flexibility to get in on these conversations if Trajan feels like it. And Trajan, more than anybody, knows, okay, what is it going to take to bring Malik Beasley back, right? He knows, right? I would guarantee almost that Trajan knows whether the room exception is going to be enough to bring Beasley back or not. I assume it's probably not, but I think he probably knows. Life with Chris says, whatever happens in the postseason, how do we position ourselves not to end up like the Kings, making the postseason, then falling off bad? What is the path forward, Omari, to make sure there's not complacency, it doesn't stagnate, it continues to push forward?
I think that's tough to answer because it probably requires multiple things to go wrong. I think one issue with Sacramento is that they never really figured out how to properly build around Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox, who, I just think Sabonis is a really unique big, and, it's tough to find bigs who fit next to him. And it kind of compounds the issue when you also have a point guard that can't shoot. So to me, outside of just the general dysfunction the Kings have always had, which they've really cleaned that up over the past couple of years, but they've also fired Mike Brown. So, where's that at now? I think you just hope that your core works. I think the cure to that's just continuing to win games, continue to do things that's worked. And I think Cade is a much easier player to build around than, Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox are. So time will tell, but I don't really see the Kings and the Pistons as parallel situations at all. I think the Kings are typically pretty unique in how their plans tend to fail.
Yeah. So Chuck says Cade is our leader. You alluded to this. Ultimately, listen, we said this before Cade was playing at an All-NBA level, we said this thing really hinges on Cade Cunningham. Like, none of the other stuff matters. Like, doesn't really matter what a star is, doesn't really matter what JD is, doesn't matter what Ron Holland is, doesn't matter if you bring in floor spacers. If Cade Cunningham isn't an all NBA level player, this thing probably isn't going to build out the way you want it to. So the way that it looks like the Kings is if this is somehow Cade Cunningham's best. Like, if somehow this is a mirage and this is better than he's ever going to be again, then you're probably screwed. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think Cade's going to be all NBA and continue to make all NBA teams and continue to raise and rise in the, ex-player in the NBA conversation. And so I think because of that, you always have a certain floor if that's who he is. This is an interesting comment from YouTube user. Ivy is our big ad for next season. I think that's the thing, Omari, is you have a lot of young players who still are like going into year 4, year 3, year 2, those type of things. And so you can still expect internal growth, where I think that Sacramento team, especially with their 2 best players, like, it just wasn't there anymore. And when Keegan kind of so far has capped at a certain spot, that's where it became stagnant. That's what Detroit has to really pay attention to. If you start to see a cap on JD, on JI, on Asar, on Ron, then you got to make a move. But they do have those young guys and draft picks that Trajan can, like, the flexibility and the ability to go and make moves is going to be there.
No doubt. And I also say, and like, I like the point, like, our big offseason addition is JI, because like it will be JI. He's going to come back. And obviously this winning streak started with him, when they were out west and they beat Phoenix and the Lakers, and then he hit the game winner in Sacramento. And, I don't know if there's a lot of reason to doubt that it could work when he comes back. But you look at how the Grizzlies have built, you look at how the Thunder have built, pretty much any team, Houston, any team that's built through the draft, when they find something that works, like, they continue to invest in their young core. They're not looking to, go and make wild swings to bring in big personalities or, other players who are going to kind of suck oxygen out of the offense. So, I would be curious to see how they navigate that. But that kind of goes into what we were saying earlier, where, like, you're getting JI back. Like, there's really no incentive to break up what you already have. And I'm sure that'll play into the extension talks as well.
All right, I want to talk 2 more things. We've gotten a lot of Marcus Sasser conversation, rightfully so, with the way he's played the last 2 games. And then we'll finish off with kind of a standings watch type of thing. So, YouTube user, do 2 Sasser games in March mean something, nothing, or everything? Alan W., I know it's been a small sample size, but seeing Sasser ball out as a scoring guard instead of trying to facilitate make you more comfortable letting THJ walk. We had some other, Steven Suggs. I think they're going to have to decide to go with THJ or Sasser. Which way should they go? Thoughts on Marcus Sasser's play the last 2 games? A lot of credit to him for setting the games in a row that he did and then coming in playing big minutes and getting big buckets. And kind of this conversation of, like, does he make it easier to let just Tim Hardaway Jr., like, you don't have to worry about that. You can let him walk this offseason and have Sasser as not a starting lineup replacement, but Ivy returns to the starting lineup and now Sasser fills a certain type of role in the bench unit.
Yeah, you need a guy that could just come in and, just light up the scoreboard if you need it. And, like, I've always thought that was Sasser's ideal role, like, to essentially come off the bench and, like, a Lou Williams type role. You're there to get buckets and not turn the ball over, essentially. And, Sasser is very good at those 2 things. He's young, like, he's fit the core. And really just the main knock is just, how many small guys can you have before it becomes problematic, if you're also bringing Dennis Schroeder back. And I think Schroeder is such a pest defensively that, that kind of makes up for a lot of it, and I think Sasser has that at times as well. But otherwise, the last 2 games, like, I think that's exactly who he is. Like, I think it obviously serves a pretty big need when, you're missing a guy like Cade. Like, you're not going to replace Cade. So sometimes you just need somebody who can come in and light up the score sheet, and you just hope you can defend well enough. So I like Sasser's game. I think he's fit this team pretty well. And, like, especially this past week, like, I think he's had a tough job of having to stay ready, with fluctuating minutes, and he stayed ready. That's what his job was, and he's done it so far.
Aruna says, I don't think THJ and Sasser are particularly comparable. THJ's length and defense is one of the reasons he's been so valuable for us. Sasser is more comparable to Beasley. Kind of in general, I think the roles, that makes sense. The one thing I will say is, though, Malik Beasley is an elite off-the-ball shooter. off screens, off movement, relocation, transition. Sasser has not been that as much in terms of a catch and shoot guy, even though in these two games we have seen more of those samples. He likes to score with the ball in his hands more than Malik Beasley does. I wonder if Sasser just ends up being like that 11th guy, Omari. And my thing is like, that would suck for Marcus Sasser, but as somebody that like watches the team, if I'm looking at the depth chart and I say, okay, these 5 are the starters, these 5 guys are off the bench, holy cow, they have Marcus Sasser as their 5th guard and Paul Reed as their 3rd center. That is like, that's really good. That's a great spot to be in. Like, so I think that's where I would feel with Sasser as opposed to maybe like the backup point guard, which I don't think either of us think that's his ideal role, or if he's the backup quote unquote 2 guard, then like, can you play him with Schroeder significant minutes throughout a regular season? I definitely don't think you do in the playoffs. Maybe you can get by with it in the regular season. All right, before we get out of here, we got to look at standings watch, record, stuff like that. Steven Suggs says, what's the best worst case scenario for the last 9 games of the season? I'd like them to win at least 5, so they'll have the best record since Flip's 07-08 team, better than SVG's 15-16 team. I will assume that you are right, Steven, because I don't have all of that right here. I will say the Pistons are 41-32 at time of recording, have a couple days off 0-2. They are 6th in the Eastern Conference. They are tied with the Bucks, 2 behind the Pacers, 5 behind the Knicks, and then they are 5.5 up on the Hawks, 6 up on the Magic. What is that? 8.5 on the Bulls and like almost 10 on the Heat. The Magic numbers, they are 4 wins. Remember, it can be a Pistons win or a loss for the other team. So they are 4 from the Magic number for the Hawks and the Magic because Orlando has the tiebreaker, and they are 1 from the Bulls, which would essentially make sure they're in like the 8 or 7 or 8. So like, it's close, Amari. Like, they're getting real close. By the time we record next, they legit could have a playoff spot locked up. What do you foresee with the upcoming schedule of Cleveland, Minnesota, OKC? Pretty tough stretch of 3 games, assuming those 3 teams are playing their full rosters.
Yeah, like that might be the toughest 3-game stretch of the season, being completely honest, because Minnesota, they kind of went down to the wire with the Pistons last time they played. I think Anthony Edwards had 52 or something like that. But the Pistons won. But Minnesota's a better team than they were then. And that game went down to the wire, and it'll be at Target Center. So that's going to be a tough game. The Cavs obviously is going to be a tough game. Pistons have lost against them, I think 3 times this season. So you're trying to avoid a sweep. I don't need to explain why OKC is tough. Like, if you could get one, and I don't want to underestimate this team, but that is truly a brutal 3-game stretch when you're trying to move up the standings. You get some relief at the end of that, Toronto, and then you get the Grizzlies at home the next day, which maybe that's a coin flip. The Grizzlies have had some issues of their own, so maybe you'll catch them on a vulnerable night, but Like this next week is really going to make or break a lot of it to an extent, I think. You still have the back-to-back against Milwaukee to end the season, too. So you have to account for the Damian Lillard situation. I really don't know how that's going to play out. I just know that, this next 3-game stretch is going to dictate a lot for where the Pistons end up.
Yeah, YouTube user says, don't look in the rear view, we're moving up. That's fair. My natural instinct is just I apologize that my natural instinct is looking to secure the playoff spot, not necessarily looking to move up. But yeah, I mean, again, they are 1 game up in the win column. They have 1 more loss than the Bucks. So, the same thing right there. The Pacers, 2. I mean, this is a team that could legitimately end up in the 5 seed. Who knows what's going to happen with the Bucks without Damian Lillard? And again, all thoughts with him that he's okay, first and foremost, health wise, but also that he is able to return at some point and all of that. But it's exciting times. Peek behind the curtain. We jump on either before or after, and O2 and Wes and I are always we get to talk about actual basketball. I mean, March 26th last year, we were probably doing a mock draft, right? We were arguing over, the number 5 pick, and, not that they had landed it yet, but, history had said. And so the fact we're talking standings and seeding and playoff matchups, Alan W., I see your last question there. We will definitely talk more about who the better matchups are and stuff as we move forward. We're probably going to get out of here this week, but it's crazy. And we have a lot of really cool ideas for that playoff series. We've already talked about guests that we would like to bring on to preview them, recap them as we're going throughout the series. I think we'll have some really cool content. And remember, to continue to get that, make sure you're checking out Pistons Jack, you're checking out Downtown Deuce, you're checking out Locked On Pistons, you're checking out the Pin Down on Detroit Bad Boys YouTube channel. But with a little bit of biasy, you're checking out Omari Sankofa II on the Detroit Free Press, and you're subscribed and reading the very free Motor City Hoops Substack. I think that'll do it this week, O2, but things are about to get a lot of fun with this stretch run and then into the postseason. Your first postseason as an NBA beat writer. Also, college hoops. Like we didn't even have to talk March Madness because we had so much Pistons content, and we could talk March Madness if we really wanted to. So it's good stuff right now. Good vibes in Michigan, right?
Yeah, no, I was talking to somebody like the other day at the game. Like, this has been a complete change of pace for like how my March normally is. Like, March last season was the longest March of all time. Like, there was absolutely no reason for there to still be basketball being played. Like, the season was thoroughly over. And this year, like, I haven't touched any draft content at all. Like, it's the first time since I've been doing this that I've not touched the draft at all. You know, they're probably not gonna have a first round pick unless they, you know, try to get in somehow. It's been fun. You know, it's been a complete change of pace. You know, it's been exciting, and, you know, it gives us a lot to talk about. So that's always nice.
All right, real quick. Friday night, we got Michigan State, Ole Miss. We got Michigan, Auburn in the same arena in Atlanta. This is amazing. Wait, do those two could we get Michigan State if they both win? Is that what we get potentially on Sunday?
I think so.
This is incredible. So what lottery pick will drop to us in the second round? I hope so, Chuck. Listen, I got my second round stuff ready to go whenever we need it. We just aren't going to need it for, me and YouTube user, we've been talking second round bigs. We got a month though, at least, before we got to talk about that. Thoughts on Michigan State, Ole Miss, and Michigan Auburn, Omari? Like, we got to get this a little bit.
Michigan State national championship. Michigan, no national championship. I don't know where they lose, but that's
okay. So what would be sweeter for you, them just going ahead and losing on Friday, or actually getting to knock them out on Sunday in the Elite Eight to go to the Final Four?
Like, whatever path allows Michigan State to have a chance at the Final Four, that's the main thing. I'll always be hurt that the 2020 season, which was the team of destiny, got wiped out because of road events. So, and this is the redeemed team, and like, I feel it, man. Izzo masterclass this year. I'm ready.
Listen, all I know Michigan State basketball is Jace Richardson, because that's the only. My students. Here, guess, you want to guess the player my students know? This won't surprise anybody. Cohen Carr. That's the only player they know. They talk about Cohen Carr every day because he's just an insane athlete. So. Anyway, Downtown Zoo says, excellent stuff as always, fellas. We appreciate it. Thank you to everybody who joined. Yes, drop a like and a sub. Everybody, thank you. Support. Go check out everybody else's content and what they're doing. There's a lot to go around right now, and it's all really, really good. Rate, review, subscribe, yada, yada, yada. We will be back next week sometime, and we'll check back in then. Until then, take it away, O2.
Big thanks, as always, to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief, Dakota Avery Dickles, and as always, big shout out to Wes Davenport, and we will talk to you all next week.